episode of ET Smart Investor, where we talk about everything related to your investments and more with our experts. I'm Neha Vashisht, and today I have Dr. Mukesh Jindal with me, who is the co-founder at Alpha Capital with us. Thank you so much for joining us today on ET Markets live stream, Dr. Jindal.
Thank you, Neha. As always, it's always a pleasure to be on this channel and talk to everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, so for the audience joining us today, we will be talking all about the importance of emergency fund in this live stream. So, Dr. Jindal, can we start with why having an emergency fund is important and what exactly is that?
So, Neha, emergency fund is something which is most neglected. People don't talk about it and people don't plan for it. Now, to
Yeah,
understand the why and what, it's also important to understand the psychology behind what's happening. And I'll tell you what's happening. Like human beings, as a species, we are very bullish, we are very positive people. And which is good
yeah,
also, one should be positive. That's the outlook. And we always feel that things will be always good with us, and
hmm,
we never imagine that we will die one day or something bad can happen, like we can lose job or there can be medical emergency. So people
yeah,
don't plan for these things. In fact, majority of the people don't plan. They think they nothing is going to happen to them, but suddenly we have train accidents which we happen in Odisha. There's so many motor vehicle accidents, there are medical emergencies, there are job
yeah,
losses, we had a COVID scenario. These things keeps playing out, and there's a
hmm,
95% probability that nothing wrong will happen, but also there's a 5% possibility that it may play out what we had not imagined. So
yeah,
we have at one place one set of people who think very bullish, very positive about life. That's how it should be. And now you have a another class of people which are also known as millennials, and the
yeah,
young generation. They have a different thought process. They go with the thought
hmm,
process of zindagi na milegi dobara, and
yeah,
they will solve solution, they'll find solution when they reach there, and which is
yeah,
also fine. So they spend money. This generation spends a lot of money, they don't think about it. And so really there are no savings. In fact, there was an interesting survey which was conducted in America, and what they found out is that 70% of the population of US don't have even 1 month of expense with them in case they happen to lose the job. And this is
hmm,
America, where the income levels are pretty high. But India,
yeah,
where we have a per capita income of dollar 2,500, I think the distress can be pretty high, and that's why we have a lot of such situations. So I think the why is important, because till the time,
hmm,
it's not that people are not aware about it, but the reason is not enough.
yeah,
And to get a good why, I'll take a help of Stephen Covey. I think I'm sure you must have heard about him. He's written a fantastic book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Has been a bestseller,
hmm,
and I'll advise anyone looking for direction in life to read that book. Now, the number two most important habit is, you should always begin with the end in mind. So what he says
yeah,
is that when you start your day, imagine that today was the last day, and then rewind and see what are the things which are important. And when you will start doing it, what you will realize is, if something happens to you by the end of the day, what happens to your children? What about the
yeah,
financial expenses? If you've taken loan, how will they manage? How will they take care of expenses? And when you start thinking about those things, Neha, that's where you get a strong why to plan your emergency corpus. So I think
hmm,
answering the why part, why is important, so that we or our family don't get into any kind of financial distress. So that's where the
yeah,
why comes from. Now, what is an emergency fund? For simple terms, in simple terms, it's a cash reserve or its equivalent. It can be
hmm,
bank balance, fixed deposit, which can be liquidated at any point of time, and it's not linked to markets. And this
hmm.
cash reserves or savings help us to manage the financial distresses or unplanned situations. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what is why and why what of emergency fund.
So, talking a little bit more about emergency fund, there are a lot of rule of thumbs out there, even for emergency fund creation. We have rules such as 6S emergency rule, and a lot more. So, what do you think about these rules, and should people actually follow these rules? Do they work in real life scenarios?
Neha, these rules have been, have been running for many years, and they have been made by intelligent people. And it will be wrong to say that these rules don't work. Like 6X rule means that as an emergency fund corpus, one should have 6 months of expense in a liquid corpus
Hmm.
or investment which can be liquidated. Now, this is a simple rule. Now, why these rules are important, Neha, is that, one, everyone doesn't have the expertise of managing the finances. Some people are from
Yeah.
IT background, and, they're different background. They don't understand so well. Or second is they may not have the time. So, someone who doesn't have the time, doesn't have the expertise, want to plan the emergency fund, that's where the rule comes from, that at least keep 6X or 6 times your expense in a
Hmm.
emergency fund. Some people say 3X, some people say 6X. And these rules, the definitions have also changed now, especially
Yeah.
the rule definition have changed after COVID. And now people say that even someone should have 12 months of expense, because in COVID we saw
Hmm.
people losing the job, expenses,
Yeah.
loans were running. And see, these are thumb rules, but they're dependent on many factors. If we sit down and if we have to plan, it depends on factors like what kind of family structure you have. If, let's say, you're single,
Hmm.
then you don't need to keep a lot of emergency corpus. But let's say you are
Yeah.
married, who is dependent on you, you have kids, then the family dependence is high, then you need to have a higher corpus. Let's say you have a higher
Hmm.
income level. If you have a lot of money, of course you can keep good amount of money in emergency corpus. But there are a lot
Yeah.
of people in our society who don't earn so much, and they are hand to mouth. So expecting for them
Hmm.
to build a large corpus becomes a challenge. It also depends on
Right.
the age of the person. Someone is old, maybe he needs a higher corpus. Someone
Hmm.
has medical condition. So these are the conditions on which it is required. In fact, earlier, just to share what I do, I think it's also important that what's my thought process. See, earlier, before COVID, I was keeping 12x, which is, I follow the rule of 12x, keep 12
Hmm.
months of your expense. But then I read this interesting book from Morgan Housel. It's a very popular book, Psychology of Money. And he was talking about risk and how to manage risk. Now, risk
Yeah.
is something, it can be classified in two forms. One is what you can imagine, second is what you cannot imagine. So,
Hmm.
imagine risk is tomorrow my job may go, or
Yeah.
there is a death in the family, or accident, a medical emergency. Now, what Morgan Housel says is, if you can visualize any unwanted event, then you will very well plan it. Okay,
Yeah.
according to him, that's not a risk, because if you visualize something, you will plan for it. According to
Hmm.
him, the risk is something which you even cannot imagine.
Right.
So for example, no one imagined COVID, and let's say
Yeah.
for me, consider worst case scenario. Markets crash, I lose my job, and I have a debt, and there are a lot of my children I have to pay for the expenses, and I'm not able to manage it. It's something which I never planned.
Yeah.
So, according to Morgan Housel, what he says is that keep enough cash reserve, which will help you bounce back from that crisis. And
Hmm.
that's the definition varies for everyone. Like after that, I've started keeping 24x. Okay, and I think once someone has that kind of emergency corpus, it also increases the risk appetite. So I think it varies from person to person, but to start with, start at least with 1x. I told you about 70% of the population in US don't even have 1x of the corpus. So I'll suggest to everyone, start small and gradually build up. You start with 1x, go to 3x, 6x, 12x, and at some point of time you'll have a call internal. You'll feel how comfortable or where you feel comfortable, and that's where you can go about it.
Absolutely right. So, just to understand how emergency funds are created, what are the different ways a person can plan out an emergency fund, and where should you keep your fund?
Sure. So one, Neha, the most important thing is the creation of emergency fund, and second, of course, is how do you maintain that. So a lot of time people don't have a emergency corpus, and a lot of time people have a wrong definition of emergency corpus. People have, let's say, investments in stock market. They believe it's an emergency corpus because it's liquid, but technically technically it may be liquid, but if you ask me, I don't consider that as an emergency corpus, because let's say tomorrow market is down by 30-40%. You may not want to sell that corpus when markets are down, because you will end up
Yeah.
making losses, and we know eventually market bounces back. A lot of time people have investments in real estate. They feel they'll be able to liquidate the properties, which we have seen in the past. It's not easy to sell properties in distress. A lot of
Yeah.
SME business owners or entrepreneurs have the money in their own business. They keep withdrawing from there, and even when business comes into stress, it becomes a challenge. So one, it has to be clear about what is the right investment or corpus which can be considered for the emergency fund. So I think there are
Mm.
levels which one should consider. The basic level is a bank balance, and the definition, of course, is that any investment which you have or any liquidity which you have can be redeemed at any point of time. Okay, it should not be
Okay.
lien marked, and it should not be dependent on anything, and bank balance is easily accessible. You have an ATM card
Mm.
even if the bank is closed, and you can withdraw from bank very easily. And
Yeah.
so basic level is you keep some amount in bank balance, but the challenge is you can't keep a lot of corpus in bank balance because of all the scams. If you have a bank
Hmm.
balance which is a huge and there's a scam, then you may see those money going away. So the second level will be fixed deposit. With the same
Yeah.
bank, you can have a fixed deposit, which is again easy to be broken, and it immediately comes into the bank account.
Mm.
So that is also something which is better, because it will fetch you higher return. And let's say
Yeah.
if someone has a higher corpus, and that's where a debt mutual fund comes in, which invest in bonds and all, becomes important, because in debt funds there are no entry charges and not no exit charges, and you get full
Mm.
interest for the period which you have invested. Unlike when you break the fixed deposits, there are charges and you get lower rates. So there are hierarchies. Yeah, you
Mm.
have the cash, then you have the bank fixed deposit, and of course then you have the um, your debt funds. Anything beyond that, any of, if you've lended to a friend, don't consider it to be liquid. If you have invested in shares, property, or any other instrument, and it's not considered to be corpus. And what is also equally important, Neha, is building this up. And a lot of time people have this mindset that once I have a good enough corpus, I'll put the money in the emergency corpus. I think that's not the right mindset. You have to start somewhere. Let's say even if
Yeah.
someone has a salary of 10,000 rupees, you start with 100 rupee. You can
Mm.
start with 1%, and you start investing 1% every month or every quarter. Try to increase the percentage to 2 3. And the beauty of this gradual saving is that gradually this corpus becomes larger, and that interests you more, and then the saving percentage also goes up.
Right. So, I also want to know that what are the some important things or important factors one can keep in their mind when planning for an emergency fund?
So there are many factors. Of course, we discussed few. Now, one factor is that you also have to keep in mind that when you keep the money in emergency corpus, it will give you low return. Okay,
Mm.
this objective of emerging emergency corpus is risk management. Don't focus on
Yeah.
return over here. A lot of time
Mm.
investors, they don't want to compromise on the return, because they believe that if they'll invest in equity, land, property, other places, they may fetch a higher return. And let's say
Right.
someone
Right.
is keeping the money in bank or FD, they may get a return of 6-7%, and post tax it will be at 4-5%, and it's a drag on the overall wealth creation and overall return. So one is we need to change this mindset, and it's
Mm.
okay for that corpus to earn less. And because the objective of that money is risk management, it's not wealth maximization. So I think it's important that people become comfortable with that mindset. A lot of time people have this issue, like even when we meet a lot of our clients, they say they don't want to keep the money so much in debt, invest everything. So I think that
Hmm.
mindset change is something which is required. Second, what is also important, Neha, is insurance becomes very important. Okay, like
Yeah.
when I say insurance, medical insurance, life insurance becomes very important, because what happens is, if you don't have a medical emergency insurance, and if there is a medical emergency, then you have to draw down on heavily on your savings or the emergency corpus, which means you have to keep a larger corpus. Similarly, if
Right.
something happens to the life of a person and the life insurance is not there, then the requirement may be suddenly very high. So what happens when you
Hmm.
buy this medical insurance or life insurance? The premium is very less, and in case of these unplanned events, we get a support from the financial institutions, which
Hmm.
reduces the stress on us. And a lot of time, what also happens, Neha, is that people are underinsured. We have
Yeah.
a tendency that we get insurance from the organization where we are working, and it could be 5 lakh, 2 lakh, 3 lakh, and people feel that will be enough. And what I
Hmm.
suggest is that people should increase the insurance cover. And the beauty of increasing the insurance cover is that incremental premium for higher insurance is very less. The first 5
Hmm.
lakhs of cover will always cost you the maximum premium. If you scale up it to 10, 15, 20, 50, or even 1 crore, the premium rise doesn't happen. But that
Hmm.
coverage will ensure that there's no big drawdown on your emergency corpus. So I think using insurance becomes equally very important. So yeah, these are some of the factors which one can consider.
All right. So before we move to the audience questions, I have one last thing to discuss, which is about disadvantages of emergency fund. We talked about a lot of positives, but are there any disadvantages as well?
Yeah, Neha, we spoke about many positive. The disadvantages, of course, is a drag on the return, and the money will earn less, which we also discussed. And so one has to be comfortable that the money which you have kept in the corpus, it's not going to be giving you super return. It's not going to be tax efficient, because a lot of time people look at tax efficiency. So it has its own disadvantage. It will hamper the real growth. But I think having said that, really doesn't matter. And it's like buying a car insurance, and we pay a small premium, but it helps us prevent from a lot of unwanted risk. And I think that's the only disadvantage which I could think about. And otherwise, there are only positives and positives, and everyone should be conscious about it. In the words of what Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind, and you'll get a lot of visibility around that.
All right. So now I'm going to take some questions, only the ones that are relevant to our topic of the day. So Hiten is asking, can we invest in gold as emergency fund through gold selling apps online?
See, gold, Neha, is according to me not emergency fund, because it has a very high volatility. And gold can also fall by 30-40%. It has happened in the past, and so that's a challenge. The good thing about gold is that it is liquid, and you can
Hmm.
sell gold whenever required. But again, you don't want to get into a situation where you have a liquidity requirement and gold prices are down, because whenever any asset class prices comes down, it always goes back. And so if you end up selling in a down market, then you may end up making losses in the portfolio. So technically, I'll not advise gold to be used for emergency corpus.
All right. So just before we finish our session for today, I would want to know your take on emergency fund. What would you suggest that works for most people? Like we were discussing about 6x and 12x. What do you think in today's scenario will work for most people in their 30s or 40s maybe?
See, I think, Neha, 3x is a good number to start with. And we also discuss about 70% of the US population not even having 1 month of expense. I don't think that will be the case in India, especially of working,
Yeah.
because we are slightly conservative. Our parents have been conservative. We have been taught to do savings and all. So I assume
Yeah.
1 or 2 months will be there. But I think, one should grow gradually, keep it 3x. And I think
Hmm.
6x is a good number to achieve because, uncertainties can happen.
Yeah.
And if they really want to manage the risk as, the income level goes up, I'll suggest even scaling it up to 12x. And once,
Hmm.
and see, Neha, what happens once you have this corpus, it has, big advantage that it increases your risk taking ability. So the
Yeah.
example in my case, what I've done, I have this emergency corpus which is comfortable. Now all the incremental money, I deploy that in high risk investments, and
Yeah.
to maximize the wealth. And I'm not worried about it because I'm okay even if the investments are down for 5 years or 10 years. It doesn't matter because I've been
Hmm.
able to protect that, my
Right.
requirements. And so the risk taking ability goes up, the peace of mind comes, you'll be able to sleep well. And I think that's what is a test. So as it increase, as you increase your 3x, 6x, or 12x, I think the peace of mind will come. You'll have a very, very good sleep, and that's what matters. I think that's a litmus test. Nothing else matters. How sound the
Yeah.
sleep is. And yes, so this is, consider this like a sleeping pill. If you
Hmm.
have a good emergency corpus, you'll get a good, very sound and happy sleep.
Definitely agree with that. I think there's nothing better than a sound sleep. And with that, we have reached the end of our segment today. Thank you so much, Dr. Jindal, for joining us on ET Markets live stream and explaining emergency fund to all of us.
Thank you so much, Neha. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all the audience who took out the time to hear us. Thank you so much.